is the Alzheimer's and all other related dementia. So although Alzheimer's is the leading cause of dementia, any dementia is supported by our association. We have people that can help talk about everything that we're going to be discussing in just a minute. So dementia is a term that many people use, and they use it in conjunction with Alzheimer's, right? I'm sure most of you have heard somebody refer to both as basically the same thing. And as I'm out in the community, anywhere from South Canada to North Pennsylvania, basically, anywhere up and down 81, the most common question I get, two most common questions. The most common question I get is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? And the second is, can you diagnose me with Alzheimer's? I can't do that. And that's a conversation I tell them to have with their primary care physician to begin with. The first one we can answer. Dementia is the set of symptoms that we think of when we often talk about Alzheimer's. Dementia is that umbrella term covering the loss of memory, the cognitive function, and other abilities that are affected that cause problems in your daily life. And dementia can take a lot of different forms and have a lot of different causes. One of the big focuses we have is the difference between dementia and normal aging. For example, I was presenting to a senior citizens group here outside of Syracuse in Liverpool, New York. And again, we were on this slide, and a lovely older woman named Coral raised her hand, and she goes, can you diagnose me? And I go, no. What are your concerns though? She goes, I think I have dementia. I'm having trouble remembering names. I always seem to have them right on the tip of my tongue, and they're always hard for me to remember. And I go, Coral, have you always had trouble remembering names? And she goes, yes. And I go, has it just gotten a little worse? She goes, yes. And I go, okay. Is it a problem, or is it something that you're recognizing as just a little more difficult? She goes, yeah, it's just a little more difficult. Like it's one thing to forget the name of the nurse's assistant that you haven't seen in 8 months. It's another to forget the name of your granddaughter. And she goes, oh, okay. All right. So dementia is that interference which causes problems that are new. Some of us are always a little clumsy. Some of us are always a little forgetful. The classic example of opening the refrigerator door and going, what am I looking for? Closing it and then doing it again right away. Yeah, I do that all the time. It's when you open the refrigerator door and you realize your car keys are in there. Those kind of things. The memories, the day-to-day living are interfered with. And dementia, all of those symptoms can be caused by a variety of different reasons. The diagnoses for dementia that cause are listed to the right on this slide. I like to talk to people and say it's like dementia. When you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I have a fever, or the doctor says you have a cough and your lymph nodes are swollen. That's not the diagnosis. That's the prevalent symptoms, right? And then they say, well, it's because of the flu, because of rheumatoid arthritis, because of this. And they break down where those symptoms come from. Alzheimer's is at the top of that list for dementia because in our country, 60 to 80% of dementia is known to have been caused by Alzheimer's. However, down the list, you can find different reasons. Vascular dementia is just that. Usually it's neuron-related issues caused by blood supply in the brain. Lewy body, it's caused by another factors that cause plaques that build up in the brain. Frontotemporal is a dementia that causes damage specifically to those areas of the brain, the frontotemporal areas. And I'm a pop culture guy. Frontotemporal dementia was in the news a lot recently because of Bruce Willis. The famous actor retired due to frontotemporal dementia. And one of the big differences between Alzheimer's and FTD as it presents is FTD causes a lot of issues more with emotions and vocal and the ability to speak more quickly. Whereas Alzheimer's causes lots of things across the spectrum. Frontotemporal dementia, really, those are where the symptoms come out, is emotional control and your ability to find the right words. So Bruce Willis, they say, retired because he was able to remember his lines. He wasn't able to say them. That disconnect, that's where that difficulty presented with FTD. And there's just other ways that dementia can come out, Huntington's, or a combination of everything. Mixed dementia is a thing. There's a lot of interconnected physiological reasons for dementia. Is there any questions at this point about anything we've had so far? Don't see anything, so I'm gonna move on and go back to the PowerPoint. Alzheimer's, as I mentioned, is the leading cause of dementia here in the United States. It's a progressive disease that affects the brain, that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. They start small and get big. And at the beginning, it can be mistaken for other things. It can be just even considered a bad day or lack of sleep or normal aging. However, as it moves on physiologically, it builds up and causes more and more damage until at the end stage, the person living with Alzheimer's does require 24/7 care. And there is no cure as of this point for Alzheimer's. We're working on it. Again, the goal of the Alzheimer's Association is to not have to be an Alzheimer's Association and to eliminate Alzheimer's and dementia. Looking at the numbers, I mentioned we have 2025 numbers out. Some of the numbers we have show that different populations are affected differently. Moving from the bottom up, 2/3 of those living with Alzheimer's in the US are women. Those in the Hispanic community are 1.5 times more likely to live with Alzheimer's than white Americans. And Black Americans, it's twice as likely. It's tough with Alzheimer's right now because we have a lot of data and we don't necessarily have the answers that explain the data. These populations, the identifications as to who's higher risk is just that. These are the numbers we have. As for the specific causes of these numbers, most of it from right now we're looking at depends on diet, depends on risk factors, depends on situations where these populations are more at risk. And as we attempt to continue to find out more information about Alzheimer's throughout the population of our country, it's important that we encourage everybody to participate in that knowledge discovery. And we'll talk about that in one of the later slides real quick. Caregiving, again, is one of the features and focuses of the Alzheimer's Association. This is where I get a quick aside. The Alzheimer's Association logo, you can see it right there in the bottom if you haven't seen it before. In between is those two round objects. And the reason for that logo is on the right side, it looks like a beaker from the lab, representing the science behind research to try to find a cure and the answers behind Alzheimer's. And on the left, it flipped to look like the head of the person that cares, either the caregiver, the person living with dementia, or a loved one, or a friend, or an ally of the cause. So it's the caregiver and the research combined, the person and the science combined to make the most impact. Again, numbers, it's a lot of them. If you can feel free to read them and take a look. If you have any questions, please ask. However, the total impact is mind-blowing sometimes. And I know I'm living it a little bit in terms of caregiving, and others have been living it for years. So to go through that, there's many, many costs. I'm gonna move through this a little quicker as well. There's a lot to look at on this slide. Excuse me. Each of these slides, by the way, we have a longer presentation, a longer education program that we have available to be presented. And 10 warning signs is one of the more popular ones because everybody's concerned, especially those of an aging population. And these are the 10 things that the association, in conjunction with other groups, have identified as the biggest warning signs for Alzheimer's. And again, whenever I show this to especially an older demographic group, they go, oh, yep, I do number 5 and 9 and 3. And it's not a how-to guide, right? It's not a, this is what you're doing. It's a list of things to take a look at that if there are changes, then if they're problematic, then it's something to be concerned about, to bring up to the person involved or to bring up to a primary care physician. We talked about memory loss and time and place. Those are often very simple and common things that people think of when they think of Alzheimer's and dementia. For decreased or poor judgment, I mentioned I was a caregiver for my great aunt. Bernice was a very smart, hard-working woman here in Syracuse. I worked for this local Catholic elementary school for most of her life. She was a lunch lady. And I helped take care of her, brought her to doctors, and just we lived with her and my dad and my grandmother. And as things got a little worse, the biggest thing we noticed was that decreased her poor judgment. And what put the nail in the head, she was doing pretty well about compensating, was I got a call from her doctor's office and it was told, hey, Mark, do you know Bernice has money? There's a lot of money in her purse. I go, no, she usually carries some cash, especially at this time of the month. They go, no, we mean like $18,000 in her purse. And I go, oh, that's not normal. It turns out Bernice had cleaned out her bank account. She didn't trust banks anymore. She thought somebody was trying to take her money and thought that the solution was to keep her money on her at all time. The little bit of levity is that we still don't know what happened to most of that money. I kept on putting it in a safe place for her, and it kept on getting displaced. And we believe the church had a really good day one day, but that at least would be a happy ending to it. Worrisome issues like that throughout these 10 warning signs are what we're looking for. Just making sure, checking to see if there's any. Let's see. Thank you. I mentioned that early detection is part of our mission. And again, I had one woman at a presentation in Auburn raise her hand and say, why should we care? She was 95 years old. Why should we care if we have this, if there's no cure? If it's just going to happen? And I said, that's a great question. However, the power of knowledge allows you to control what you control, to know what is happening, to have a definitive diagnosis, to say, this is what I'm going through, and these are the steps that I can take to ensure my family, my friends, my loved ones, and myself have the best life that we can do as it comes to this disease. So instead of the situation controlling what you do your best to control the situation. There are clinical studies I mentioned talking about the data to try to improve data. There are treatment options now that have not been in place before. And to be involved, to have that power, and to be able to know, even if you're going to get to a point where you won't have that ability to affect the decisions, to make them now and know that you are set. It's a very strong way to encourage those people that may be affected by this disease across the board. So early detection, we think, is a key to this, because the earlier you find it, the more difference we can make. I mentioned treatments, and we live in an age of treatment now because there are multiple drugs approved by the FDA that affect Alzheimer's specifically. It says, that you cannot cure Alzheimer's. We have no cure. There's always been ways to treat the symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's. One of the more common ones, excuse me, try to affect the way the brain works to compensate for some of the changes physiologically that Alzheimer's causes. Or there's prescriptions for anxiety or for issues with appetite and sleep. Now we have infusion treatments. There's two drugs, the Leqembi and Kisunla, that are on the market. Again, they're infusion drugs, which means they're IVs that are effective and approved by the FDA for treatment of Alzheimer's. However, there are some caveats to that. They do not stop the disease. They do not cure the disease. They slow it down. The drugs have been shown effective to increase the period of time where someone lives in what's called mild cognitive impairment, which is that early stage of Alzheimer's where the symptoms are present. However, they have not caused that difficulty of life we assume with Alzheimer's. And it's important that early detection happens, because if you're not diagnosed with that window, currently those treatments aren't prescribed for that. However, in today's situation, the research, it comes hot and heavy. They're working on so many different things right now. It's insane to read sometimes. So this might be different come next year. Right now, two things. I'm sure there may be some questions about treatment. And like I said, we'll do Q&A at the end. We've got a few more slides to go through. In terms of, sorry, I'm going to flip over and just make sure there's no, okay, thank you. Brain health is important. Brain health is wonderful. We all love our brains, at least most days of our life. It depends on what it comes up with. When I'm trying to sleep at night, then I get a little angry with it. But we do what we can to improve our brain health, right? And the bottom line is that third bullet on this slide. If it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain. If anything you read about that improves your heart's condition and can improve your brain's condition, because those two organs are so closely linked. Your brain uses so much of the resources of your body that the heart helps produce and provide. It's important, those two things together. And some of the choices we can make include simple things like protecting your head, right? Trying to get some sleep, keeping your mind occupied. All right. I know so many people do different things like Sudoku, crosswords, puzzles. We encourage my dad, again, lives with a traumatic brain injury, and we've seen him he made progress when we started delivering him the newspaper. Right here in Syracuse, we get it 3 times a day. I'm like the only house on the block that still gets a newspaper delivered, but my dad reads it and goes through and keeps up. And he and I have conversations about the news every day. Some of the more difficult things, as usual, is that, like I said, sleeping, controlling blood pressure, eating right, get moving, right? I have the privilege of hearing the woman who runs Upstate Geriatrics here in Syracuse. It's a center of excellence for Alzheimer's research. And she constantly says, I know we tell you to get moving, to get exercise, do all that stuff. It's hard. Just walk. The science has shown such a correlation between getting up and walking. You don't have to go to a gym. You don't have to run. You don't have to do that. Just walk. And it shows so much better results for people as they move forward. So I mentioned Alzheimer's is a community disease. Those living with Alzheimer's and dementia, it affects them, their loved ones, caregivers, neighbors, anybody about that. And the Alzheimer's Association always looks for help to affect all over the community that we are in. I mentioned real quick about the range of where we are. We're cover Tompkins County. Our office is, I'm sitting here in East Syracuse. We cover 14 counties, and all the services we provide are free throughout the counties. We do support groups. We do early stage social engagement. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But first, I want to talk about the helpline. It's an amazing service, 24/7. Call for whatever questions, either those people living with dementia, caregivers, general community, and they're trained clinicians on the line ready to help. And they have access to resources that the home office provides, and they connect those people with local resources, because that's the important thing, is trying to make sure they have those things on the ground nearby. So we get people that call the helpline and they come to us. My favorite story about the helpline is, for follow-up, I called some people that had used our services. A woman living in Lewis County, she was a caregiver for both her parents. Her dad was in the middle stage of Alzheimer's. Mom was in the early stage. So both parents living with Alzheimer's. And she goes, "Can I tell you, your helpline's amazing. I use it basically once a week." And I go, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, I get my parents, I get them settled down. The house gets quiet. And about 11:30 on Friday nights, I step out to the patio and I call the helpline, and I may scream and yell a little bit and rant and rave a little bit. But man, they are able to talk me through almost anything in terms of tips, tools to use, resources." She goes, and it's about once a week, to the point where there was a week I didn't call because something had happened, nothing major, just, somebody came over and my timing was off. They called me and checked in on me and were like, "You're everybody okay?" So it's a wonderful resource. The next little bit I mentioned, all of our services are free, and we'll talk a little bit more about the local services in a second. But alz.org, of course, online, and fantastic resources. Many of you might know about our walk. Our Walk to End Alzheimer's is a major fundraiser and community building event. I love the walk because out of all the walks and runs I've been a part of, and I've been doing them for years, it's the only one you don't actually have to walk at. It encourages a walk. The community is more important. The coming together, sharing of memories, of passion, of that sense of belonging, of shared experience, either wanting to fight the disease because you don't want people to suffer through it or live like that because you've lost somebody, because you're living with it, or because you're an ally and want to be there. And we have 4 walks throughout our area here in Central New York. We have a Syracuse walk, a Utica Rome walk, an Ithaca Cortland walk, and a Binghamton walk. And any of that information is down at act.alz.org. The other thing that's mentioned there is the longest day. The concept behind this is that it can happen anytime, but named after that summer solstice of that most sunlight. Alzheimer's takes away someone's light sometimes. The darkness of the disease is known by anybody that's seen it as it progresses towards its end stage. So we encourage everybody to celebrate their longest day, be it that summer solstice, be it whatever day you want to do something to raise awareness and possibly money for research and for the efforts to bring an end to Alzheimer's and dementia. So the longest day happens all year round. It can happen anywhere and everywhere, and it can be anything and everything you imagine. It can be card games like in the upper right. It can be Zumba like the bottom middle. It can be bowling like the upper left, all sorts of things. So those are wonderful ways to get involved. Speaking of getting involved, if you're interested, there are so many ways to commit and be able to help make the impact that the association does. Here's a great list of individuals, organizational, and community resources that can be done We always look for volunteers. As much as we love being everywhere we can be, it's 14 counties. And there's such a great need for education, for support groups, for representation and awareness. All of those things, volunteers help us further the impact that we make. I also mentioned a couple times today, clinical research. If you know of somebody living with dementia, if you are a family member of somebody living with dementia, or if you're just interested in being involved with clinical trials are the way to increase the scientific knowledge to help with fighting this disease. And we have something online called Trial Match, TRIAL Match, Trial Match, which has a list of different clinical studies out there. And some of them are things like testing drugs, very involved. Others, my mother was a part of one for years. She signed up for it. Every 6 months, she did a survey and sent it off to the University of Minnesota. That was it. Just a one-page survey about her age, her gender, her other little bit of identity things, her job, and then a short cognition test. Anonymous, sent off, and that's what it was. We talked about the walk. We talked about ways that other people can be involved in our community. I do this general awareness presentation all over the place for all sorts of groups. If you think your organization, if your place of work or place of worship or place of friendship would benefit from hearing this or other education programs, great, let me know. We'll be there. And then just sharing the resources that we have. The last little bit is the moment from our founding president. And it's a wonderful quote. Talking about the time. Again, I tell my child all the time, you control what you control. Make the impact you can. So a world without Alzheimer's and other dementia is our goal. I'm going to stop my sharing at this point. And thank you all for listening as I went off for a little while. And I appreciate the time you spent here today. It's something I care very deeply about. And I know we all work in a community. You all work in jobs that this affects. So we're here again. All the resources are free, and we're wherever we need to be. And the biggest thing is, if you think we're needed there, just ask, and we'll figure out a time for us to be there.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the time you took with us today. I'm going to open it up and see if we have any questions from the group. Feel free to just kind of ask it. You don't have to put your hand up at this point. We're small enough.
Beth, go ahead.
You say that people die from Alzheimer's. What's the pathophysiology of that? What actually causes them to die?
The most common way, and the numbers are beyond me right now. However, as Alzheimer's progresses, the damage to the brain moves from the external part to that brainstem. So swallowing, sometimes breathing, those natural day-to-day things we don't give thoughts to, those processes can be affected.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mark, do you have included the new numbers and the new infographic, and we'll send out his PowerPoint to everyone. But I was wondering, do you have that info in a PDF that we could share with the group? It looks like a nice poster to print out or whatever and have around.
Would you like me to send it to you, Karen? And I can.
Yeah, and then I can attach it to the
Perfect.
minutes.
I'll send it.
I think when people have more time to like look at it, or if you put it up in your waiting rooms or things like that, it might hit some folks.
Yeah, and if there's any information that you need, please reach out. We'll be happy to drop it off, be happy to mail it out, anything like that. We have a catalog, looks like this. I'm sure some of you might know what it looks like. Sorry, as I'm sending her the things. Oh, that's
Yeah.
blurry. There you go. Uh, but we just released a new one for the spring and summer that summarizes our education programs, the support groups. We have support groups in every county. Some are virtual, some are in person. Some we also have some specialized support groups. Most of our groups are for caregivers. We have a few that are for those living in the early stage of the disease. We also have something called early stage social engagement, which happens in various counties throughout the year. That is social activities designed to take place in a safe environment for people living with dementia and their caregiver. So usually we have partners or dyads, as my coworker calls them, come to these events, and no matter what happens, it's a low risk environment. A lot of, you looked at, if you remember that 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, one of the last things is that people withdraw from social situations. And not only is that a symptom of living, a warning sign of Alzheimer's, it's also a consequence, right? People become embarrassed and anxious over their own behavior. And they say no to things they normally would do because they're afraid of embarrassing themselves and their loved ones. And we do social engagement programs anywhere from, we do baseball games up here in Syracuse. We were just at, goodness, where was it that I was a little jealous of? We were up at a museum in the North Country, and I know in Ithaca, this is where I'm looking at the catalog as I'm looking at it. They're doing, in July, they have a cruise on Cayuga Lake, right? That is free of charge, registration required. And people go, and it just allows anyone that may be affected by this disease in that situation to be themselves and to be free to be in a social situation. And I've had the lucky opportunities to go to some of these, right? We try to go and attend to help out and be there. And it's always wonderful, one, to see people kind of leave some of that baggage at the door and enjoy themselves for a time, for a little while, and to make connections with others that have the same experience. So it's a wonderful thing that we provide. So
And so we just get a hold of you to
Sorry, what
have
was that?
those. I said we just get a hold of you to have those materials, like. And is there a web page like to see the catalog and stuff?
I actually
I-
was gonna say, we just got our package yesterday, so there's a
Oh,
bunch in
good.
our office if anybody wants to grab one.
And Karen, I'm going to email you, like I've emailed you like 6 times. I'll email you the facts and figures infographics, as
Wonderful.
well as the digital link to our
Great.
catalog once we get it. I haven't got it yet. We usually get it towards like a couple days after we get the catalog. So
Great.
because we get the catalog here at the office the same time you all do if you're on our mailing list, because it gets mailed to us too. So
One
but
last question.
I'm going to put my email address and phone number in the chat in case anybody doesn't get the catalog and wants it, or also if they have any questions about setting anything else up or any other materials I can provide.
Great, thanks. One last question from me. Sometimes I get confused between the chapters. I know that Finger Lakes and Central New York kind of covers us. Is that still the case, or where should we be, like, if we're in Ithaca, Tompkins County, do we go to Central? Is that who we?
Start with us, and if it's somebody that we need to coordinate with Rochester Finger Lakes, it will easily do that.
Okay.
Because I know those border counties always, we do the same thing in the North Country with our chapter to the east, and Herkimer and those other ones to the east. We work together and say, okay, who can best, depending on the person, the organization, and the relationship, who needs to help take care of it. So,
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we switch over to our meeting agenda?
I'll just say again, if you haven't already, if you could, put your name and organization and the, and the zip code for your organization in the chat for me, that'd be wonderful. I'm recording, I'm getting those now.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it. And I know you were pitch hitting, so that was really nice of you to be available.
You got all hands on deck, right?
That's All right, great. Thanks.
I'm gonna hop off. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I appreciate it. If there's anything you can do, just reach out, okay?
Will do. Thank you, Mark.
Take care.
So I just wanted to give an opportunity for us to do a go around and make announcements of events coming up. I know that there's some different things that each of you have that's going on, and share it here and then also email it to me. I did get Karen, I got your link, but you email it to me and I'll make sure it gets into the minutes that goes out. And do you want to start, Karen, since you popped yours in?
Sure. I think I mentioned it at the last meeting too, but we are, this year is the 50th anniversary of our office. So for that, we are going to have a celebration, as well as bringing back the Senior Living Expo. The date is July 25th. It's at the Hotel Ithaca from 2 to 5. So invites have gone out. But if you are an agency serving older adults in the capacity, please let me know if you wish to table. We would love to have you. We're gonna have a breakout session that will more than likely be on the topic of scams and frauds and elder abuse, things like that. We're going to have a room dedicated. Anne Riley, the physical therapist, has graciously agreed to offer free fall screenings. So we're going to have that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're excited to bring it back. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me.
Great. Thanks, Karen.
I just got a question for you all. So some of you know me, but I'm not regular in this meeting. My name's Rebecca Hinton. I work for United Way of Tompkins County. I try to attend a lot of these kind of community meetings to learn about what's happening in all these spaces, but I did see on the agenda that this part is members only. So I just want to see if it was okay if I stay, or if it's not, I'm happy to hop off.
You're more than welcome. And we're pretty open with guests being in the meeting. We want more people to know. I just wanted people to know they didn't have to stay during this. So welcome. And maybe what we should do as well is just make sure that we introduce ourselves when we do a go around, just where we're from. I can call on people, or if anyone else has something to make an announcement, we can.
I'll jump in because I have to hop off for another call shortly. But Love Living at Home my name is Thena Lindhorst, Executive Director. We are having our annual volunteer appreciation event on Sunday, May 18th. It is free, open to the community. We will have some new additions this year thanks to a grant from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield. So we'll actually have free carousel rides at Stewart Park all day long. And then a wine tasting from Judd Falls Spirit and Liquors, as well as refreshments, some wine, and just some ways to celebrate our volunteers. So I will put the link to it in the chat, but you are all more than welcome to come. We're encouraging people to bring families, colleagues, and let's see, there is a button to register on our site. So that's really just to kind of figure out how many people are coming. But if you're not sure until the day of, just show up. We'll be at Stewart Park from 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday, May 8th. So I hope to see some of you there.
Thanks. Anyone else have any announcements? I know I don't think I see anyone from FoodNet, but just want to give a shout out to the Mac and Cheese Bowl next week. Is that Wednesday, the 7th, I think? And it's always been a lot of fun. And again, it's down at the farmers market. So it's a great opportunity to support the food net. Get out there and go.
Karen, I'll jump in since you mentioned FoodNet and Kofa's also here. So we have for the last 5 weeks, we have been doing our respite program at the fire station in Sladeville. We have 3 participants, and right now we're actually limited to those 3 because we need volunteers to help. I have one wonderful woman who's working with me, and we can handle 3 patients, but sometimes it's almost a 1-to-1. So we can't take any more patients or participants until we get some more volunteers. And we are going out and tabling. We just tabled with FoodNet at Lifelong, looking for volunteers in conjunction with that respite program, which is every Tuesday from 10 to 2 at noon. FoodNet comes in with social dining. And we now have over 20 people from our community that are eating together and enjoying each other every Tuesday at noon. So we're really delighted about that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I can send them to you, Karen, you can share them. The Alzheimer's Association, in conjunction with, I believe it was the University of Rochester, just did a series of 5 educational programs talking about dementia, different types of dementia, their services and things like that. I do have all those recordings, so if anybody's interested, I can send them to you, Karen, and you can share them. They talk about like frontal temporal lobe dementia, and they were very, very informative.
That's good. Great. Beth, is that a part of the AmeriCorps
Oh,
respite
it was, the funding was through AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps
program?
just
Or is
lost
it something
all their
different
funding.
that
All
you
their funding
were
was cut.
doing at the firehouse?
Oh, she must be delayed.
Karen, it was under AmeriCorps, but AmeriCorps just lost all their funding. So we are going to continue the program, still working with Lifespan in Rochester.
Okay.
Karen,
Apparently my internet is not doing great.
Did you hear anything I said?
Well, there goes Karen.
But if anybody didn't hear me, AmeriCorps did lose all their funding. They had to lay off employees, but we're still working with Lifespan, and money-wise, we weren't really depending on them. We did get some games and things, but excuse me. But we have every intention of continuing. It's just we need volunteers.
That's awesome. Beth, I'm glad to hear that. I know that I had spoke with Doris too, so I was wondering what was happening, but we'd be happy to promote that and your volunteer stuff any way we can in our newsletters and things. Just let us know what you'd like and we'll send it out too.
Yeah, and I hope to be there in, was it July, Karen? Yeah.
Great. Is this Karen? Oh yeah, there she is.
I'm not sure if you can you
Maybe if
hear
you turn the video off, because we can hear
me
you.
now?
Kinda.
Now it doesn't want to turn off. I definitely am changing my internet provider. It's been a problem today. Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to stop fiddling with that. Is there anything else that folks had that they wanted to share? Beth, I just want, before I moved off of that real quick, I just want to say that's really exciting, and if anybody can get this up and going and have momentum, I have all my faith in your dedication to that. So I'm really excited about it. And I just want to echo Lisa in saying whatever we can do from the long-term care committee aspect of it to support the initiative, that would be great.
Thank you.
I'd love to put our heads together. If there isn't anything else, we could probably wrap it up for today. And get a chance to go out. It looks like there's a break in the clouds and it's sunny right now. So get a chance to actually enjoy the sunshine for a little bit. Because I don't know if anyone's seen the weather forecast. So